Good morning. At the conclusion of AdHamtz Bereishis, which was left unfinished, so we're learning the Mittler Rebbe's discourse, Maimer. We're up to page 387, discussing the continuing themes that the Rebbe Rasha began speaking about on page 1466. But when he got to 1477, which is the end of the Hemshech, he did not finish. And namely, we're talking about the effect of Shema Yisrael, the contemplation about divine unity and how existence is all part of the divine, unified, seamless whole without any change, how that affects the animal soul, which is obviously a big statement because the animal soul on its own is driven by its own impulsive interests, self-interest, which is antithetical, like the Rebbe Rashab's words. He says, how's it possible that the soul can affect bittul? Bittul is selflessness, is dedication, is devotion, is not looking at yourself, going beyond yourself. In a nefesh habamis, whose entire personality and identity is about tekef hayeshes, meaning an intense sense of self and self-interest. So, after a long discussion about what the true reality is, that the reality of existence, including the existence of the animal soul, is all part of the divine master plan and mysterious plan, you can add, which is to create existence with concealments that allow existence to feel like it's an independent consciousness. But in truth, the whole purpose is for a human being, Neshama, Shema Yisrael, to come and declare Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that in all this existence is really an expression of godliness. And not just an expression, but the highest level of godliness is undiluted and not in any way compromise its integrity as it manifests within existence. As the Mittler Rebbe elaborated upon, the Rebbe Rashab elaborated upon. So now we come back on this page, where he returned to this idea. On page 386, that Metam Zeh, now we can go back and say, okay, that's why Shema leads to V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. It affects that there will be love, not just in the right side of the heart, with the divine soul, but also the left side, the left chamber, which is the domain of the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh Habam is the animal soul. And that's what we're in the middle of learning. So essentially, a few things that he said and how it impacts. Then number one, because the Nefesh Habam has seichel, intelligence, it could be spoken to and discussed, and it could be explained. Essentially, so Nefesh Habamis can also understand with its seichel and be mechayiv and agree, and also more than just agree, actually feel the compelling case for this truth of reality. It would be like a Nefesh Habamis saying, all I have is a cup of water. And a scientist will explain, no, the cup of water is made of H2O, and that H2O is made up of molecules that are made up of atoms and subatomic particles. So Chassidus, Shema Yisrael, comes and says it's all made up of divine energy. And the purpose of drinking the water is in order to connect to that divine energy, all the way to the highest levels of unity. So Nefesh Habamis is receptive to that if you do the proper contemplation and the proper focus. So you have, okay. And and all this is due to the fact because the reality of godliness is not just in heaven, it's also on earth, not just b'shamayim mimal, but it's mitachas, ein oid. The ein oid, the seamless divine unity, the only reality, the divine, is equally below as it is above. In truth, it takes the work and the avodah and the awareness and the contemplation that we're talking about to get to that type of cognizance and awareness of it. But that's already about becoming sensitizing ourselves to the truth. And emes yeda darkei. And the truth shines the way, will illuminate the path, even for the animal soul. Then on page 387, which we're middle of, the next paragraph, he continued, which we learned yesterday. So now he says, and that's after b'chol levavcha, that even the Yetzer Hara in the left compartment, in the left side of the heart, which by nature is yeredes lamata. What is the focus of an animal on its own? Its own survival. However, which is the exact diametric opposite of the divine soul, which is the Adam, Ruach Adam El Lamaila, transcendence. So how can you get how the animal soul is the opposite, diametric opposite of transcendence? It's like going down, whereas the neshama is going up, so to speak, reaching upward. So he says, when you do this contemplation and you recognize that the divine soul recognizes the utter seamless unity of the divine, and also in Ishtalshus recognizes that all of existence is ma'ayin liyesh, gam ruach habehema. So then also the spirit of or the breath or the energy of the animal soul that by itself goes downward. So then who gam seichel anushi shemegashi yakiv v'yovim be'ema kadas lahavchina emes mamish. It too comes to recognize and discern and appreciate the truth for the reason that we spoke about earlier, because before God there's no concealment. So for the animal soul on its own, there is a concealment, like we learned. But the divine soul is educating and teaching the animal soul that in truth there is no concealment. And that if you allow yourself, the animal soul can discover its own source, which is, like he explained in the Behemer Rabbah, in the Sher Sheba Markava, and even higher in Atzilus. As he said, the Malchus of Atzilus, which is Ban, Shem Ban, is elevated through Shem Ma, which is Adam, Adam of Behema Teshia, like he said. Okay, Adam Behema Teshia Hashem. So also the Ruach HaBehema is also now elevating to the higher level, as he brought from the Zehar, the Revia al Elef Turim, B'Shas Islam, that on its own Ban is like the animal that I said Revia. What did I say? Revia. I said Revia. I said was it travels. But I think the translation that you posted was not traveling. It hovers over. Let me see. How's it translated in the Zohar that was quoted?
I don't remember offhand. And I just signed on.
I'm looking it up. Okay. I got it here. Yeah, the expression he uses, revia, I think I said revia was, here it says crouches. Okay. Revia means crouches. Revia could be also encompasses, it could be consumes. Creature that crouches on 1,000 mountains. So from there it's elevated to being like the Markava that lifts up the kisei, the throne, like he says, Rechev al Kruv Kal. Bottom line, it's an elevation from something that is descending down into Biyah, it's now being elevated. And like he said, like the Paris, like the animals that carry the Odin, that we learned about before from Shmuel, Sefer Shmuel, Merkava de Malchus Shenesis Sakise. So, this animal soul, which on its own would be consumed and involved in its own, following its own impulses and being seduced by the temptations of this world, through this avodah of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, comes to a state of ahavta that the animal soul is now harnessed to carry the Odin, or in our avodah is harnessed to help support and bring more divine love into our lives. Like we see, an animal can be roaming in the wild, or it could serve as a carrier of taking a person. Ratz l'dvar mitzvah. You could ride a horse, you ride an animal, and the animal helps you to reach, to do a mitzvah, to do a good deed. So you could harness the animal soul toward this higher purpose of loving God. And that's where we reach to the end of the parentheses, in middle, 2/3 or 3/4 down the page, 387. I'm going to continue reading from there now. So when you get beyond all the expressions, some of them are a little cryptic, some are very Kabbalistic. The bottom line is simple English. We're talking about harnessing a selfish animal soul that all of us have, we're all aware of, and harnessing, directing it, and it being elevated to also serve and love God and experience the truth of reality. Now, of course, a person who does that is creating a far more unified and seamless life, where he doesn't have two voices going in two different directions, but it's an animal soul that is supporting the divine soul. Okay. So now comes another parenthesis, and as I said, I'd make an order with the parentheses as much as I'm able to. So this next parenthesis, I'm suggesting that it concludes on the bottom line of the page, after the word veloy. So let's read it, and you'll see how it flows. So this is all, remember, before the parentheses, the last thing we learned before the parentheses was, just to go back, was the words that also seichel anushi, shevemoyach gashmi, that even human intelligence in the physical mind, which on its own would be driven by its own survival and its own needs, yakir, comes to recognize and understand v'yovim be'emek hadas lahavchina emes mamish. Then the parentheses just discussed about that the helm doesn't affect, because before God there's no concealment, as we just learned. The idea of malchus, of pan, that becomes the markava. That's what the animals turned into. So now the next parenthesis goes like this. And this is again referring and citing the material that he used earlier, that the Remitler Rebbe explained earlier, to bring it all together as he's tying together all the knots here. So the line that begins, the Malchus Shenesis Sakise Vidal, the parenthesis ends, and now starts another parenthesis. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along. Like was explained earlier. Now, where was this earlier? It was all the way back. Let's take us back to page, I believe, 364. 364, 365, and 366. He spoke about the contrast between the divine soul and the animal soul. Just let me refresh everyone's memory. He spoke about that the neshama doesn't just remain removed above, but it comes and manifests within existence. The nefesh alekis dresses up and is enclosed in and completely becomes one with the animal soul. They're not two separate entities. They're two separate personalities, but they completely engage with one another. Like he explained, like the neshama comes into the body, to the point that the body's experiences, remember, mikre haguf, the body's experiences affect the lower levels of the soul that manifest within it. If you remember the gashmis sheberuchnis and the ruchnis shebegasmis, the blood, hua nefesh. So the same thing, that the divine soul is affected by the animal soul and vice versa. So now he's going to explain why that was so important. Because of the divine soul and animal soul, even if they reside side by side inside the human being, but if they don't really mesh and interweave with each other, then they still remain two entities. And here the goal is we want them both, that your entire heart, both sides, right and left, should both be focused, directed towards loving God. So now he's going to explain that concept, how the divine soul enters into the animal soul. It uses its faculties. Like he said, you can explain, for example, a divine idea can be explained with Nefesh Abamis language. You know, a lot of what we're learning, Mepsari Exalaka, is a language, even though it's coming from it's a divine concept, but it could be explained with examples that the animal soul completely relates to, which tells you that they speak to each other. So even though, despite the fact that initially they are opposed to one another, and there is a battle, clearly, but still there's a language, a common language that can be shared among them, and they affect each other, as we learned back then on page. Specifically, I'm referring to page, I believe it's, let's say, page 366. Let me just see closely. 367 as well. Yeah. All those pages, yeah. And especially, this is what I wanted to look at, right? Especially pages 368 and 369, where he says Dvar chidush upela, that such two opposites, and he says from the Nefloyas Haboida, he said there, that these type of two opposites that oppose each other are actually all together in one so-called become one entity. And that's what he speaks on page 369. That's what I really wanted to refer to, how they communicate with each other, and that's where he brought how the goof affects the soul, and how the soul affects the body. So essentially, it's the divine soul that comes down to be mavarer, to refine and transform the animal soul. So that's what he's now referring to. So now let's read inside. Back to page 387. And specifically the page I just said, page 369. So what did he say there? We discussed earlier that islapshus. Remember, islapshus is always used, that's not just passing through. Just like when you put on a garment, the garment fits you and you're completely enclosed in this garment. It doesn't mean you become the garment, but it's not two separate entities in the sense that they're apart. The garment becomes your expression and you manifest into that garment. So it's islapshus of nefesh lekis and nefesh abamis. Shenasim mohus echod mamish, like we learned there. To the point they become one, you can't distinguish. So when I'm speaking to you right now, is my divine soul speaking to you or my animal soul speaking to you? The answer is both together. The divine soul travels and manifests in the animal soul. Who controls what I speak about? That's already the discussion in Tanya. The question is what you choose. It could be I speak to you divrei Torah and use the animal soul and expressions of the physical world to help explain it, or the animal soul controls and I talk about things that are completely my own interests and my own survival, not even getting worse than that, even if it's not prohibited, but it is about myself. Just to use that as an example. Or the same thing, you drink a cup of water. Who's drinking the cup of water? So obviously it's your body that is physically doing it, but what part of the soul is manifest in it? Again, it's both of them. And the question is, who's in control? Is the nefesh lekis in control and the animal soul is being harnessed by the divine soul, or is the divine soul in golus and trapped and being held hostage and captive by the animal soul, as he explains in Tanya, this in more detail. So he says, so it's become muhus echad mamish within the person. Ad she'enik v'sar haruchni is delakus, to the point that pleasure and pain, spiritual, divine pleasure and pain of the nefesh lekis, of the divine soul, to spoil the targish gamma nefesh abamis, believe basar, will also impact, and that the animal soul will feel it in its very in its very flesh, heart of flesh. Like it is when we see a person is b'meriros, sad, or chedva, the simcha, joy. So we see, like he explained there, that they affect each other. So, for example, we spoke about shmur tevet tadash netzen. That when a person hears a good piece of news, which is more something of sublime nature, it actually can make that his foot will expand. And vice versa, a pain of the body or a joy of the body affects. But here he's talking about, wants to obviously talk about the effect of the nefesh on the goof. So that's why he's bringing that. So it affects the same ba'ava v'yira. So just as it is with pain, with bitter sadness and happiness, the same thing is with av and v'yira, love and reverence. That's what the pasuk is saying after Shema. That v'ahavta, you love b'chol levavcha, with all your heart, which means with both sides. So we see clearly it's affecting also the other side of the heart, which is the left side, which is the animal soul. But leiv basar dafke, but levavcha referring to leiv basar, to the actual heart of flesh, the very physical heart is permeated and infused with this love. And then he says also the opposite. V'chein b'ispilus hanefesh habamis, and the same thing the other way around. The ispilus, when the nefesh habamis, the animal soul gets excited and stimulated, Targish hanefesh alikis. The nefesh alikis will feel it. It affects it. So yes, when there's a taiva, a desire or a temptation that seduces and affects the animal soul, even though the divine soul doesn't have any connection to it, doesn't relate to it at all. Like we learned in Torah, he said, nefesh alikis, his seichel doesn't relate to anything physical and material. It's a spiritual entity. But because Hashem sent the divine soul to speak with and engage with, just like Yaakov and Esav are both in the same womb. So therefore, this is Targish HaNefesh Alikis. The Nefesh Alikis will feel it. Even though on its own, it completely negates and defies any Toyer Geshem, any physical definition or description or identity. And fundamentally, like we learned there, the divine soul is not affected by the experiences of the body at all. So clearly he means the higher levels of the divine soul, because the lower levels of the soul are affected, as we learned. I mean, you have to say that, because he's saying here, Targish HaNefesh Alikis. So maybe he's also distinguishing Targish and Tispal. It feels it, but Tispal already means it gets excited by it. You can't say the divine soul gets excited by a pleasure of this world. It feels it. It feels that the animal soul is schlepping it. Just like, God forbid, when we say Talmud, Shagol Maglin Rabbi Imei, if a student has to go off to Ir Miklat because he murdered someone unintentionally, the teacher goes along with him. So, or to put it in different words, the fact is when a person sins and the animal soul's in control, the divine soul has no choice to be there as well because it can't leave. But it doesn't enjoy it. It's actually in deep pain. But to say it doesn't feel the pain, of course it does. So perhaps that's also the distinction between Targish and Tispal. It feels the pain. It feels the pain, but it's not obviously getting excited because it doesn't change its personality. The divine soul doesn't, God forbid, become like the animal soul. It's just being schlepped along, like being held hostage. I'm just elaborating a bit. But he also says, in his poem, Mikra Guf Klal, which goes back to what we learned, that the higher levels of the neshama remain removed. It's when the neshama comes into the gashmis, the ruchni shebegashmis, meaning like the dam hu nefesh, that's where it's affected. There he was also saying, Elakus, however, even as it comes into existence, Koach HaPoel B'nifl is not affected. But when it comes to soul and body, or here divine soul and animal soul, they all do communicate with each other. But however, the story's not over. The divine soul, when it does its job, it can elevate the animal soul to come to a point because it recognizes that the divine is never really affected, even as it comes down below. So that's what he continues now. Let me continue to the end of the parentheses, and then I'll stop for any questions. So just as it is with Nefesh Alikis and Nefesh Abamis, so too is it above. Like we said, the root of the Nefesh Alikis, Adam, is Ma. The root of the Nefesh Abamis is Ban, Behema. So he's explaining the same idea. That what? The Masha Yeredis, I think this means Ha Malchus. This must be a mistake. I don't know what Hamem Chef. Unless he's writing Malchus, Mem, sometimes he write Mem Lamed, but Malchus is spelled Mem Lamed Chaf Vav Sof. So maybe he means, but I've never seen it that way. Hey Mem Chaf is usually Hamichtav or so you have to say Siridis HaMalchus because that's what he spoke about earlier. If you look earlier, he said Malchus Yeredis. So I'm almost sure he means here Malchus. I don't know, or it can be Merkava, because then it would not be Mem Chaf either. So I'm assuming it's Malchus. I don't see them making any remark down below. Shiredis HaMalchus Lamata Mata. So Malchus on its own goes down below. Kamoy bebehemes v'chayes di yitzira. Now the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe is adding. Remember we learned about that the behemes and chayes are in the Merkava. So that's in Bria and Yitzira. So here he's saying behemes and chayes yitzira. So we're on a lower level. So we know that in Bria it's usually Serafim, and the Merkava is a more sublime Merkava. But then we say Chayas HaKedesh Yitzira, and in Asiya it's Ifanim. So he's saying Behem Zechayas the Yitzira means it's going down from Atzilus down below. Ad Klipas Neged Asiya. Yeah, this is all the same language he used before. So Shem Ba goes all the way down into the Klipas Neged Asiya, meaning which is where the animal soul dwells. Zeu Kedimyan HaNefesh HaBamis. So this Shem Ban that goes downward, Malchus and so on, is like similar to the animal soul. That Ruach HaBehemi Yeredes Lamata, the Adam, the animal soul of the person, the Tizbar the Gam Mihi. And just as the animal soul is refined, so too Shem Ban, that we spoke about earlier, goes downward. Also, it's now being affected to go upward, to be elevated. Gam Hi, Vitala Lamaila, Ba'aliyah de Ruach HaAdam, Ta'atzilus. That it should be elevated together with the spirit of Shem Ma'av Adam, of the Nefesh Alekis, of Shem Ma'av Atzilus. Just as it is, just as the Nefesh Alekis manifests inside the animal soul and affects it with the power to elevate it, so too Shema affects Shem Ban as it goes down below, so that it too should be elevated all the way to Atzilus, like we learned in the previous parentheses. And here he adds another parenthesis, V'hu Mishum, just as he said before, that because there's no concealment before God. Now he says this is due to the fact Shasevul Beis Deis Ke'echad. He's bringing back now the union of the two Deis, Das Elyon and Das Tacht. Because you're talking about the Nefesh Elikis, the Neshama, Shema Yisrael, that's rooted all the way higher than these both experiences, both Yichud Tato and Yichud Elah, or Das Tacht and Das Elyon. It contains both. Al Kain, V'loi niskanu alilis v'loi. That's why it combines both. That God, Loi, relates to the workings of existence, plans them, but also V'loi is above them. Again, using the expressions that he used earlier, that it's contained but not contained. It's contained in existence but not contained by existence. Like we learned earlier, V'loi and the Loi. So the Rebbe is just making very brief reference to terms we used earlier, but essentially is that the Nefesh Elikis has this capacity to come into the animal soul and elevate it, which is against its nature. And as I explained, because it's actually invoking powers that are beyond the system. Like I said yesterday from the other day, I said that you can't change a system, you can't fix a problem from within the system that the problem was created. But you could bring down a higher energy, which is exactly what the Nefesh Elikis is doing, to create b'cholavavcha b'shnei tzerecha, not just taming the animal soul, but getting it to be harnessed and completely united in this process of Achdus, of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, to the point v'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'cholavavcha. It's interesting, we also say v'haftas Hashem Elokecha. He's not mentioning that diuk, but also says not just v'haftas Hashem Elokecha, v'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'cholavavcha. Just pointing that out. And this ends the short parentheses, and I'm suggesting that the longer parentheses that we read now, today's class, also stops here. So really there should be two parentheses here at the end of Hu Mishum Shesevel, which will then account for the parentheses that open that we didn't have a place where it ends. There's still going to be issues with the parentheses as we go on, but that's how I would suggest. And the reason I say that, because the next line sounds to me very clearly that he's going back to the themes discussed before both parentheses. So you're going to go back now to Zeh Yishma Yisrael Dafka, which doesn't really seem to fit in the parentheses. That's why I suggest that here go two parentheses. And that concludes point number 2 after finishing point number 1. Obviously, it's all one flow of ideas. So we're not talking about separate concepts. But for whatever reason, the Mittler Rebbe chose to put some things in parentheses and some things is outside of the parentheses. Like I said, it's not always easy to figure out exactly why. And it's not so relevant, frankly, either, because the ideas are pretty clear. But I'm going to stop here right now for questions, or if you need any points to be clarified, please take it away. Anybody?
I don't understand the logic of the last few psukim or phrases where he's comparing the Yerida, the Nefesh Elokis into the goof, and it's I don't know, communion with interaction with the Nefesh Bahamas.
You don't understand what I explained, or you have
I
a
understand
particular question?
I understand. I don't understand the logic. So he's comparing it. Hold on, he's comparing it in the universal order of the
Well, very simple.
red.
A person is riding on a horse, and the horse goes wild, and the horse starts leading the rider to who knows where, to dangerous places. That's the nefesh habamis affecting the nefesh elikis. Or the rider of the horse has the horse under control and harnesses it, and then the horse leads him to places he couldn't reach on his own.
That I get.
So now they're both engaged with each other. They both can affect each other. That's the key. They affect each other. They're not two separate realities, even though their personalities are very different, but they come together. That's what Hashem did. And I explained what I quoted before from page 368 through 69. This is God's wonders, that he brings together such two different factors, and they engage with each other. And that's the whole point of an neshama, as pure and divine as it is. Like we say every day, neshama shenesata bi tahirahi, pure, divine, etc. But it comes down, ata barosa, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi, ata meshamra bikirbi, and that's the whole engaging between the two of them.
I understand all that.
So which part? No, I'm saying which part is not clear.
The part where it says Damashi Yared Hamalchus Lamata Mata Kmo Bahamas.
Okay, so that's
okay.
So that explains how it is below. So he says, now let's go back to what he said before, that all this reflects also higher levels. Mam Ban are two divine expressions. One is Shema Odom Bittel of Atzilus. Ban is Gematria Behema, is the divine as it manifests in Malchus that enters into Biyah. It goes into Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah. It descends and is concealed. That's the divine energy that manifests within existence. On its own, that divine energy is concealed. The Avodah of a person in Bittel of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is to take the Shema of your neshama, of the Nefesh Elokis, and affect the Shem Ban, that the Malchus that goes down below, instead of it just being a force that is concealed in existence, should recognize and be connected to the divine, and it should be elevated back to, like on Shabbos, for example. Throughout the 6 days of the week, Malchus descends into the material world, and that's why we work, and we do everything in the 39 different types of work. On Shabbos, Vayechul HaShamayim, Malchus elevates back to Atzilus. So it's back to its spiritual source, so to speak.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
But still, there was something bugging me because
I understand something's bugging, but you have to spell out what it is, because I don't know.
I'm trying. You keep trying to anticipate my question. When Elikus descends,
I'm trying to cut to the chase because there are other people in the class.
But I have to ask the question.
Go ahead.
The constitution of Bahamas is divine energy that comes from Al-Khuraim, as I understand it. It's coming from the backside of God. It's not. He
doesn't say that here. He doesn't say that right here.
But is that not the case from Tanya?
Yeah, but we're not talking Tanya. We're learning this.
But I mean,
what's your question?
Is Chassidus.
So what's your question?
The Elikus that comes down, he's saying Lamata into the Nefesh of Bahamas. That's inconsistent because Elikus from Atzilus does not create a Nefesh of Bahamas. Only Ma'acharaim creates a Nefesh of Bahamas. That's the logical inconsistency I'm struggling with.
This has nothing to do with what we learned here, by the way. You're asking a very different question now. You're saying, how does the Nefesh Habamis become a Nefesh Habamis? That's what you're asking, right?
Not exactly, but he's giving a comparison, but the comparison doesn't seem to fit the point he's trying to make.
I don't know what you're saying. 1 second. This whole physical world is created by God, correct?
Yes.
But how could a physical world be a physical world? Because godliness has to be concealed. It's concealed. So when you look at a table, at a chair, at a bird, at an animal, what you're seeing is the physical manifestation. And we know within it, like he's been speaking at length, koyach ha'poel b'nifel.
Okay, all right, I got it.
The divine energy is concealed within it. The Nefesh Habamis and the Guf are part of that existence. The divine is concealed within it. On its own, it will just do what its own things. The Nefesh Elokis has the power to change things, to reveal this divine that's concealed, and instead of it going downward, now being elevated back to its source.
Okay. I think that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry for pairing.
Okay. Any other questions? But one more point that he made is that when the animal soul is elevated, it actually accesses the source that first originate, which is the Merkava, like he said, the Sher in the Merkava, or even higher in Atzilus, like he says, L'mayla Yeser, the words were L'mayla, the animal, that it goes all the way back to Shem Ban. So in other words, like I explained yesterday, at the end of the day, the animal soul was sent, and all this concealment is ultimately an agent of God's to serve a purpose, which is to challenge us. But the animal soul on its own doesn't know that, or at least down below doesn't know it. And that's part of the transformation. Okay?
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question. Remember when we're talking about, like way back in Ayin Base, we're talking about the Or and Kali. The idea was that they were all simultaneous, and as they were coming down in the Seder Hishtatlut, then it would be more Kali, would be more apparent and less Or. Is that the blending, basically? Is that also can be applied in this concept that, in other words, the Nefesh is the same, Bahamid and the Elokis are the same, but as they're coming down to the body, then the animalistic soul initially is more revealed than it was the godly soul, but through avoda is what we trying to basically do.
No, I wouldn't say that at all.
Okay.
The divine soul and animal soul have very different sources. You're talking about in the place where Das Tachten and Das Elyon are one? You mean
Correct.
all the way in Atzmos?
Correct.
All the way there, there's no animal soul altogether. There's no klippus, there's no anything. There, it's simply God having two desires. One is to reveal pure godliness, and the other is to bring a godliness into existence. Then, with its tzimtzumim and all that, it'll ultimately evolve into two tracks, Ur and Keli, which will then, two tracks, Ma'ban, and ultimately, yes, there will be the root of the divine soul, the root of the animal soul. When you invoke those highest levels, you can affect the animal soul. So ultimately, yes, the animal soul, as it stands in the highest levels, is not an animal soul at all. It's just another divine force, if that's what you mean. So when you go back to Hashem Echad Mamish, yes, that's why you connect the divine soul, animal soul. But you have to be very careful, because the fact is they are two very opposite forces within us. But they're coming now, they both can be directed to become B'chol Levavcha, B'shnei Yitzarecha, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. But you still say B'chol Levavcha, you still say two sides of the heart. Because with all this unity, they still, like we talked about, La'asad Lave, that even with the full unity, there'll still be diversity. We spoke about Mikot and Vad Gadol. So you can't, it's not that the divine soul and the animal soul ever become one. There's no need for them to become one. You want to have is that the animal soul understands that it is a complete seamless part of the picture, and Chanami, from Atzma's point of view, everything is oneness. But we're talking about permeating that one is permeating existence the way we see it. So you have to really know you're talking from Atzma's point of view, from our point of view.
Thank you.
But that's an important discussion, because can we see it from Atzma's point of view and see it mamish as one? Look, the Eibishter wanted Atzilus. He wanted Eris and Kalim. He wants them both to become united, but he wants it to be diverse as well. So it's a combination of both. At the end of the day, there is an aspect for sure from Atzma's point of view where everything is a seamless unity. But he doesn't just want seamless unity, he wants that seamless unity expressed in existence. So that's where you need to have these different levels. Like you can ask the question, once you have Havaya Chad, Shema Yachad, Havayim HaYehu, Havaya Chad, Shema Yachad, Will there be a difference between Ma and Ban, for example, or Ab and Sag? You have to say there will be, because they're divine energies. There are different ways that the divine flows. So they're all rooted in one place, and they're all fundamentally one, but it's a one that also expresses itself in many different, we call it different colors. It's like a prism. It's a one light, but the prism causes it to become what's the word I want to use? Separated, divided into different colors, but they're all fundamentally color white. Okay.
Well, not except, but in regards to what it does say here, commotion mavur l'mayla b'slabish hanefesh alakis b'nefesh shenasa mahus echad mamish. So, that mahus, I think in the Lasid Lavo, right, when our XLLakam and Basari XLLkai, there will be a physical body. I mean, where we go according to the Ramban, there will be still the Nefesh al-Bahamas and Nefesh al-Kis, materialism, but that materialism will express God, the unity of godliness too, like the mashal of the oil and the shemen and the wick, and then the wick and the shemen. When he says here that this unity of mamash achas, that's what I've been struggling with, that will become mohus achas. It's either that I would think that would be in the mashal that the Rebbe used about the shemen and the psila, that where it becomes totally united, mahuz achas would be in the divine flame. The divine flame that the two, the nefesh al-kis, the oil, the nefesh al-bahamas, work together to produce a divine flame, and in the flame they become united. Otherwise, the oil and the
that is accurate only the second half, but it's not accurate entirely. When the soul goes into the body, is there a point where you could say this finger, is it soul or body? The soul and body become so one that you can't distinguish between the two. That's what he said. This is even before Avodah. So the Mehusach and Mamish is talking before Avodah, that the way God made it, and that's why he said it's from the wonders of God. You have to go back to page 368 and 369. He said it very explicitly there at length. Read it there, and you'll see exactly. He explained why it means Mehus Echad Mamish. They become literally like one, where you cannot distinguish the two. There's no way that a person can do an Avera that the Neshama is not in some way engaged in it, meaning divine soul. Obviously, there are levels of the divine soul that are not affected by it, and they're deeper, but it's the way it's created. In other words, like I said, that's why it's called being held captive, hostage. You can be in Golos. A tzaddik can be in Golos too, in that sense. So Mahus Echad Mamish means they join as one, and you can't separate the two, even though they are two separate forces. So it's like a compound in chemistry, where two elements or two molecules come together, and you can't separate them. They become together, even though their ingredients are different. And then the Avodah is that the divine soul should affect the animal soul also in a way that it unifies it toward godliness. So that's what I would add to what you said. So it's correct that in the Avodah, ultimately, you're talking about finding one seamless fusion between the two, both direct. But even with the wick and the oil, the oil doesn't become the wick, and the wick doesn't become the oil. It's still a wick that is drawing from the oil. So we're not talking about losing its identity. We're talking about harnessing and directing it toward one purpose. Okay.
And why does it say Yoredet Lamata La Klippa Noga? What about Klippas Gimel Klippas Tameus? Why can't it go down that low?
First of all, it does go down to Shalosh Klippas Tameus, but Malchus on its own goes to Klippas Nega. Shalosh Klippas Tameus is already a deeper darkness that maybe he doesn't want to go into now because it's not relevant to our discussion here. But it doesn't negate the fact that there could be Shalosh Klippas Tameus. We know there are Shalosh Klippas Tameus. He's not coming to negate anything here. He's just explaining that Malchus, Ban, Shem Ban, is still a name of God that goes into Klippas Nega. Shalosh Klippas Tameus, we talk about their godliness is so concealed that you can't talk about Shem Ban anymore. You can't. It's like what they say, Chaticha Nasa Nevela. The divine spark has become so darkened as if it's darkness itself. It's like a piece of kosher meat that fell into a pot of non-kosher. So for all practical purposes, it's bottle, and it's like becomes the nevela, even though initially it was a kosher piece, but it now has become complete like a black hole. So the light is completely inescapable, it becomes completely trapped there. Here he's not interested in going, the point here in this mimer is not going in explaining the whole picture of klippus here. He's talking here about the idea of nefesh. Nefesh habamis, as we know from Tanya, is klippus nega. So he's not negay here. If you want to talk about it, that's called a different level of avodah where you have to go into. That's where you need tshuva. If a person, God forbid, falls there, or you have to avoid shalosh klippus atmeis. But it's not the discussion here per se. Okay. Okay.
That was sort of where I was headed with my question a little bit. But is it correct that when Elikus from Malchus travels down to that lower, very low level, it then becomes what in Tanya is called Me'acharaim.
Acharaim generally means that the energy is not flowing directly; it's flowing so-called very in a diminished state. Like he says in Tanya, it's like throwing something to somebody over your back. You know, if you want to give a gift to your child, you give it to them face to face. If you're facing your back, if you're turning your back to someone, it means you're not giving them your whole presence. So essentially what that means in Ruchnius, that the energy is very diminished. So Acharayim really refers to all levels of diminishment. That's essentially what it is. It's a diminished flow.
But okay, the flow from Malchus of Atzilus all the way down to Klibus Noga of Asiya, and that lowest level, is that such a diminished flow that you could call it Me'acharaim? Is that correct or not?
I wouldn't call it that way. I would say that Acharayim is the very flow itself is in a state of Acharayim throughout those levels. And Acharayim is not necessarily only Asiya. Acharayim, I think he's also, you could say, in Yetzirah and other levels. In other words, it's all relative to what the Pnimius was.
Got it. Okay.
I mean, I'd have to see the exact context in Tanya. Maybe he is referring to the Acharayim and Asiya. It's possible. But since he doesn't use it, I don't know which. Acharayim in general means the backside, meaning the diminished flow.
Yes.
It could be, for example, you have the expression from B'chinas Acharayim of Atzilus will come lower levels. B'chinas Acharayim of Bria. It's like the Chitzenius of a higher level. But Acharayim really in the fullest sense, when he says B'chinas Acharayim or Le'umazeh or Klippa, is usually referring to the diminished flow. An Asiya obviously is the lowest level. So that's where you'd use it in its most, I guess, in its most
expressed form.
Yeah, most manifest form is obviously in the lowest levels. And in general, Klippas Nega is another question, where Klippas Nega begins. Does it begin in Bria, in Yetzirah, in Asiya? It's also a discussion, which is not for here. Here he's just talking in general terms.
Yeah. So that's what I was getting at. Well, what's the exchange we just had for my prior question? Anyways, you explained it. You explained it very well. So we're good.
Okay.
I mean, that was extremely helpful. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
And, yes, sir. Thanks for teeing it up.
Thanks. I have one more question, if I may.
Please.
The Rebbe here speaks about the Merkava, and the Karuach Adam Ba'atzmis Pnei Shur Merkava Paro Shanasu as Arum, that the Merkava can be used to carry up, if you can tamely utilize the Merkava to elevate and to go to higher levels.
Which is like the animal can then is being served. Like I said, it's harnessed to carry the carriage or the Merkava, the chariot. Yeah. Right.
So my question is, there of two of those four legs of the Merkava, so to speak, or wheels, of however you want to refer to it, are the treif animals. One is a nesher, and one is an aryeh, right? So how can a treif animal be domesticated, so to speak? If you tell me about a par or a lamb or kevis, I could understand that. But
so I would recommend that you go in Torah ask this question very directly in Torah the Alter Rebbe, and he explains it. So first of all, the fact that an animal is not kosher, that's not kosher for eating. But you could ride a horse, even though you're not supposed to eat horse meat.
Right.
You can ride a camel. You can ride other animals that are not necessarily. They're also created by God.
Right.
So even we say, so from achila point of view, it's osir ba'achila, but not osir ba'hana, which means hana is like klipas nega, and therefore can be harnessed and used for something kedusha, as
Got
we
it.
see. That's
Got it.
one. Number two, he does discuss there that sometimes the highest levels come down, the lowest levels down below. So it could be very high in the Merkava, but below it comes down as a behemoth. His question there is actually why are animals in the Merkava become tameh? That's even a better question. Why if it's in the Merkava above Aryeh and Nesher, as you said, so why below is a Chayat Meya? So he explains. So it's all part of that discussion.
I see.
Yeah.
And I just realized when you said that, it's not a Isra Bahana, the vision of Mashiach riding on an Aryeh. Is that from, I've seen paintings.
Aryeh or Chamer?
No, I think I've seen a picture. I mean, I think Nakshan actually has a picture of a
Chamer on a donkey, not on a lion. It says Ani v'reichav al Chamer. I've never heard that Mashiach rides on the lion.
There is a painting of his, but maybe it's not based on Hazal.
Yeah, but that would be a beferish and action, but not necessarily a beferish and pasuk.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Like someone says, I said, what's the source? They said it's a beferish of COL. You know?
Okay, thank you. I got it.
Okay. So let's continue. Unless the last line on the page says, V'zeu Shema Yisrael dafka. So you see why I feel it's outside the parentheses, because he's going back to the central theme that he's been discussing. And it doesn't sound like he would leave that in the parentheses, the Shema Yisrael, when that's like the whole central point. So this is Shema Yisrael dafka. Dafka Yisrael, which was referring to Zehu, and that is Nefesh Alikis. So Yisrael is referring to the divine soul, Shesharsha. Next page, 388. Its root is Bepnimius V'atzmis Elikus. As we learned earlier, Ola b'machshava, it arose in this thought, it's like in the inner and core of the divine. That's where Yisrael is rooted, the Nefesh Alikis. Kamesh Kosav, and now he's bringing back the pasuk that we, if you remember, all began with this pasuk. Ner Havaya Nishma Sadam, that the soul of a human being is Ner Havaya. So you're talking about that it's Ner Havaya, the highest levels of Havaya. And the goal is, and the objective is that because Shema Yisrael, the Nefesh Kis is rooted there, that's why it has the power, Shagam, B'nefesh HaPamis, Shema Yisrael, hear Israel, that also the animal soul, Teir Eir Elikia Yidei Shem Havaya Shabbat, that the light, the divine light, through the Shem Havaya within it. And here, most likely, he means Shem Havaya is Shem Ma and Shem Ban. They're both from Shem Havaya. That the Shem Havaya Shabbat should radiate, even though initially it's concealed. Shezeu Shekosav or Sha'omar Havaya Lekenu Dafke Kanal. And that's what we mean when we say Shema Yisrael Havaya Lekenu. So he's going back actually to the initial question that he asked at the bottom of 384. What does Havaya Lekenu come to add or come to negate? And why is Dafka be Yisrael? So in a way, he's going back to that initial point, because Yisrael rooted in this highest levels of the previous aspects where Das Tachten and Das Elyon are like one, affects that the Nefesh Abamis, that the Havaya with the Nefesh Abamis, which in Shem Ban is concealed as it descends lower, Ruach HaBehema Yeredes Lamata, that too should be revealed, and that's Havaya Lekenu Dafka, Canal. So this tying together, that's why I feel these few lines it doesn't seem to belong in the parentheses. It's just too central of a theme to all the pages here. That's why I'm just giving you my logic why I think the parentheses ends the last line of the last page. Okay. And now, any questions on this last piece? Because this is tying together now all the different points. And now this parentheses, which also does not seem to have an end. So I think the end of the next parenthesis is at the end of the paragraph. That's, again, my assumption. So now he's going to say that what will be la'asad lavei. Remember earlier we learned that Shema Yisrael is also today. The ultimate union will be revealed and seen la'asad lavei. But that doesn't mean that today we don't have it in a concealed way. He said that very explicitly on page 385, I believe. Let me just see. Was it 385 or earlier? Just a moment. I want to just see that because I think it's relevant to our discussion. It's also ato. Oh, page 386, he said it. Sorry, 386. He said, with the Yesh Amiti and the Yesh Anivra will become one without Pirut, without a Mamutza. That's l'asad lavei. And that's why, but also, Mamish Gam Ato Rakshu Behelam, B'Levush. Yeah. But now that's what he concludes here. He says, Kamosha Yeh l'asad lavei. Like it'll be in the future, Sheikablu Ma'atzmus Alakus. That they will receive from the core of Elikus, Bli Mamutza Klal Canal. 2 pages ago, 386, he said that. Without the Mamutza of the ayin. So even though it flows through but it'll be literally connecting to Atzmus, Shemetam Zeh, for this reason, Gam HaGufim Yikablu Kamaya Neshamos. The bodies will also receive Elikus, just like the souls, the Yichyu Chaya Elam, and will live forever. That's Chiyas HaMesim. And furthermore, V'gam be'umas ha'elam omar, sheyapech Hashem el amim sofa bruda. That also the nations of the world, it will also affect them that they too will be transformed. Ulekach omar gam achshav. So since also this will be the full realization of this unity, that's why we say also today, b'chol levavcha. Even though that full union in the most revealed way will be l'asad lavei, but also today we say b'chol levavcha afilu b'yetzer hara, that even with the yetzer hara we also can love God. So it's going back to the theme that he said on 386, that l'asad lavei will be the full realization of this. But today we also say, we say Shema and V'ahavta b'chol levavcha today as well, because we have the power to reach to some extent. And now he brings a raya to this. The raya lezeh. And what's a raya proof? How do you know? Maybe it's not the case. So he says, Mesiras Nefesh beguf. The fact that we see in history the ability and the reality that there were those that gave up their lives with their body. Not just they gave b'chol Mesiras harotzim, Mesiras hanefesh, that they completely dedicated, but they actually died al kiddush Hashem, Mesiras Nefesh beguf, shal zeh omer, afilu neitlas nafshecha. And that's what the Gemara says on b'chol nafshecha. After says Hashem alekech b'chol nafshecha, so the Gemara says afilu neitlas nafshecha. Even if it means taking your life, you're ready to do that. So we see that a person has that ability. It's not just tzaddikim. Even the small nitzutz, even the small spark by Yisrael, even all Yisrael have this ability, and we've seen it to be Mesiras Nefesh beguf ki yadua. So what does that tell us? That even now, the guf, which you would think is like the guf and nefesh habam is the guf, which is inferior to the soul, does not have the same divine revelation as the soul, can also be Mesiras Nefesh. So that tells you that also today we say, just like we say b'chol nafshecha, we say b'chol levavcha. Even though la'asad lavi, this will be completely revealed. And then finally, one more parenthesis. V'zehu mesiras nefesh ala Torah mitzvahs dafka shalamayla mesiras nefesh ba'ava rabba. So he's saying this Mesiras Nefesh we're talking about is Mesiras Nefesh for Torah mitzvahs that we see even with Mesiras Nefesh, not to transgress against Torah mitzvahs, which is higher than another form of Mesiras Nefesh called Ba'ava Rabba. So Mesiras Nefesh Ba'ava Rabba is not a Mesiras Nefesh where you give your body necessarily. It means that your love is so intense for God that it's to the point of Mesiras Nefesh you're completely committed.
Baguf.
Afilu beguf. So the afilu beguf, you have to say, means on Torah mitzvahs. Shalomar Mesiras Nefesh Ba'ava Rabba afilu beguf ka'ovis. So I think this is how you're supposed to read it. It's higher than Mesiras Nefesh of Ava Rabba, like by the ovis. This the Mesiras Nefesh on Torah mitzvah afilu beguf, and how do we know it's higher? So the Ovis, as high as they were, doesn't say they have Shem Havaya. They have Shem Shaddai, not Havaya. Kanal Vidal. So I think the word Afilu Beguf, he really means not an Avarabba, because then what's going on here? They also gave their Nefesh Nefesh on the Guf. You could B'deichik say he means they also have a Nefesh Beguf, but it's not on Torah mitzvahs, it's an Avarabba. But I think it's probably more likely that Afilu Beguf is referring to Mesiras Nefesh, not just Avarabba, but with a guf for Torah mitzvahs. I may be wrong. You could read Afilu Beguf that is going on the words before, or it's going on Mesiras Nefesh ba'Avarabba. I lean toward the first interpretation. Sounds more correct to me. Even though the language is somewhat, then Afilu Beguf, why didn't he write? He should have written Shavzel Mesiras Nefesh al Torah mitzvahs. Dafka Afilu Beguf. So it's not very 100% clear. So you could learn it both ways. In other words, there's two levels of Mesiras Nefesh Beguf. One is like everyone can achieve through Mesiras Nefesh, literally. The Ovis did it through Avarabba, or the Mesiras Nefesh Beguf is Dafke on Torah mitzvahs, and Avarabba is Lav Dafke connected to the Guf. Even though we know Avram Avinu did sacrifice himself in the Kif Shena Eish. He was ready. He was thrown in physically into the oven. So not positively clear which way it goes. But bottom line is, maybe I have to look. I see in the footnote they make the difference between the two Mesiras Nefesh. So I'm going to look up the sources to see how it's explained. Maybe I'll be able to get more clarity. But bottom line now, we finished the paragraph. We finished the parentheses, and as I said, I think there's supposed to be two parentheses here. One is the parentheses, the short one that we just read about Mesiras Nefesh on Torah mitzvahs, and the other one, the second line, Kamoishi Yelasalave. Here's the conclusion of the parentheses. Okay, stop here. Any questions? Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at this. Interesting. Okay.
This is a general question. Not to come in to contradict any of this here, but just to clarify it. If a person is willing to sacrifice themselves, al kiddush Hashem, is that not the Nefesh Elokis overpowering the Nefesh Bahamas? Because Nefesh Bahamas, left alone, just wants to live. It's not going to sacrifice itself for some ethereal principles. So I'm not sure why he's saying even the Nefesh Bahamas is capable of Mesiras Nefesh, because it's not really the Nefesh Bahamas that's driving it. It's the Nefesh Elokis, no?
Doesn't matter who's driving it, but the fact is that the Nefesh Bahamas can't stop it. That means that it affects the bottom line. It affects the guf. So if you could argue Nefesh Bahamas should be more powerful than Nefesh Elokis when it comes to saving its own life, it will never go on Mesiras Nefesh. But you see, the mere fact that Nefesh Elokis can affect it, even if it's forcing it, that tells you something. That means there is effect on the guf. Obviously, the highest level would be when the Nefesh Habamis itself and willingly does so. But the point is that the fact that you could have that type of the Nefesh Habamis would do everything. Who wouldn't fight for life? The Nefesh Habamis could say, no, I'm not ready to die. That's how I would answer that.
Okay.
Look, he's trying to bring a proof that even today we say b'chol levavcha, because it means it's accessible. Now, can we convince a Nefesh Habamis today? That would be an interesting question. Is there an animal soul that can be convinced to give its life on its willingly, not forced by the Nefesh Elokis?
Exactly.
Doesn't the Alter Rebbe say that actually when it really comes down to it, that any Jew will give up
chapter 18, yeah. Afil kal shel. I want to look it up. I need to look up what it says there.
Yeah,
when push comes
because
to shove,
Go ahead.
When push comes to shove, that even a kal shebekalim, like he says, nitzutz, even a very a person who's like not necessarily an extraordinary tzaddik, will also give their life. Like you see throughout history, where they said, bow to this Avodah Zarah, we kill you. Even simple people allowed themselves to be killed. So you could say the Nefesh Elokis is very powerful, but the bottom line is the Nefesh Habamis is not strong enough to stop it, even if it wanted to. You could also argue maybe it doesn't want to, but pnimius. On the outside, maybe it will yell and scream. You could also argue that fundamentally, when it comes to a moment like that, maybe the Nefesh Habamis, it goes along, even though it may not initiate it. I mean, there's different ways you can explain or discuss it.
Well, the final part of it would be, and I think this, I'm going to contort Basi Lagani from this year, that we just read, but he talked about the Tzivas Hashem and their Tzivas Hashem because of their willingness to sacrifice their lives, Mesiras Nefesh, which it's coming from the devolution of Elokus from the highest level, lowest level. So Nefesh Bahamas is sourced higher than Nefesh Elokis. So when the pnimius of Elokus is activated, if you will, in the active Mesiras Nefesh, you could argue that the Nefesh Bahamas is demonstrating its higher root. Can you say that, or is that a complete distortion of the Basi Lagani there?
How is it accessing the higher root?
Because it's sourced there. It's saying when push comes to shove, Nefesh Bahamas can reveal its high, very elevated root.
It's possible, or you could argue it's but it's the neshama that is leading the way, most likely.
I like what he said. It's very nice.
No, it may be explained in different ways in different places. I can't say for sure. I think it has to be looked into. You could say it comes to the Nefesh Elokis and it forces the Nefesh Habamis, like I said, on a very simple level. You could say Nefesh Habamis, suddenly it reveals within it its deeper connection. Or you could say, well, you can't really say it's going against the Nefesh Elokis. Or you could say the Nefesh Habamis has gotten it's so been challenged, so to speak. It's like when you really, even though Nefesh Habamis is usually a very selfish entity, but when push comes to shove, like we said, really then suddenly its deepest force, like you said, is revealed. Yeah, I think all the above are possible, yeah, including what the scenario you described.
Thank you.
I mean, you see many stories where you see people in the Soviet Union where they completely left Yiddishkeit and they abandoned and they even hurt their fellow Jews, but then something happened and suddenly and they ended up being, saving someone or doing something to sacrifice themselves for another. You have the concept. But then you could argue it may not be the Nefesh Habamis, it could be the Neshama was awakened suddenly. But either way, I'm sure, I feel that it's discussed. I'm trying to look in one of the places. The difference between the Mesiras Nefesh of the Neshama, Mesiras Nefesh of the body. I think in Ayin Bey's volume 1, he talks about the difference between the effect of Ak Now, one is Mesiras Nefesh on the neshama, and one is Mesiras Nefesh of the body. Like when Rabbi Akiva said and allowed himself, he was killed then physically, that's the ultimate Mesiras Nefesh of the body. Torture, Chmona Litzlan, etc. Mesiras Nefesh of the neshama could be Klei Nefesh, like he says here, Avarabba. You're not really, you could expire, the soul can leave, but like Nadav and Avihu, for example, they died in ecstasy. They didn't die because their bodies were thrown into a fire, or their bodies were tortured or in any other way hurt. So there's probably a discussion whether it's coming from the soul or coming from the body, and where does it originate from? This is a bigger discussion. It needs to be looked into. And I don't have it right now all in front of me. I have to look it up. Yeah.
That is an interesting.
Well, here in the footnote, if you want to look at the Likutei Sichos, volume 25, which I'm looking at right now, actually, talks about it. So I need to look into it more. I can't really say more than what. All the above seems correct. And yeah, he talks about Chanoich and Eliyahu, Mesiras Nefesh Beguf. Like, for example, the Baal Shem Tov says that if he wanted, he could have gone up, Ba'olah B'Sara HaShamayma, like Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi never physically died. He just went up to heaven with his body. But the Baal Shem Tov said, but he wanted to go through the El Ofra Tashuv. The pasuk says that you come from dust and you will return to dust. And he wanted to go through the dust. So therefore, being buried. So this is all part of the discussion of how a neshama elevates, whether it elevates with the body, without the body, etc., etc. So needs more iyun. And then, of course, where does it originate from? The soul, the body. The Mittler Rebbe is very brief here. We don't really. It just says Mesiras Torah Mitzvos Dafke and Mesiras Nefesh Ba'ava Rabba. And Ko'ovis Shmi Avaya Loina Daiti. That means the others did not have this higher level. Interesting. Okay, we'll look into it some more. I'm going to stop here. Let me stop the whole.